A Less Than Royal Narcissist, Part 24, Morgan versus Markle. This series has provided a very useful vehicle for enabling you to understand narcissism in action. The various events, occurrences, and happenings have provided an extremely enlightening opportunity to detail how a narcissist behaves with other people. Not only has this served a very useful purpose with regard to enabling people to understand what is really going on with regard to what Meghan Markle has been doing, but it has also enabled people to understand how those various dynamics are applicable to their own situations, and has granted them understanding and enlightenment. Because so much has occurred, and because there are so many different examples of various aspects of the narcissistic dynamic, it is a series that really does keep on giving. It has enabled you to understand the nature of the dynamic between Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, the interactions with the royal family, and her interactions with other people, for instance, former friends, former husband, and so forth. Just recently, another chapter in this saga has provided a fantastic opportunity to understand the dynamic in greater detail. Piers Morgan, a British broadcaster who used to be a British tabloid editor and a Daily Mail online columnist, and was recently a Good Morning Britain ITV host, stormed off set as a consequence of an argument that he was having about Meghan Markle. Not that long ago, the Duchess of Sussex and her husband, Prince Harry, were interviewed by Oprah Winfrey, and you can understand the analysis of that interview in A Less Than Royal Narcissist Part 18. You'll be familiar with what was spoken about, and the following day, Morgan responded on his television programme stating, "I wouldn't believe her if she read me a weather report." As a consequence of that, 41,000 people submitted written complaints about his behaviour. It's also noteworthy, of course, that nearly 67 million people didn't submit complaints about his behaviour. And one formal complaint, of course, came from Meghan Markle herself. Morgan is now being investigated by Ofcom, the relevant media watchdog company. On the Tuesday, Morgan returned briefly to host his ITV show before storming off. His co-presenter, Alex Beresford, defended Meghan and Harry and called out Morgan's treatment of them. Beresford stated, "I understand that you've got a personal relationship with Meghan Markle, or had one, and she cut you off. Has she said anything about you since she cut you off? I don't think she has, but yet you continue to trash her." Morgan stood up and walked out, stating, "I'm done with this," as he interrupted Beresford. His departure from ITV became official following the fact that he'd been told to apologise to Miss Markle, and he refused to do so. This has caused many people to ask questions such as, why did Piers Morgan react as he did? Why has Piers Morgan repeatedly commented adversely about Meghan Markle? Has he always disliked her? To understand what has actually gone on here requires an analysis of the dynamic between Meghan Markle and Piers Morgan. As has been established through large amounts of evidence, Meghan Markle is a narcissist. But what about Piers Morgan? Well, it may come as no surprise to you to learn that he is also a narcissist. I am not going to go into the details of why that is in this video. That is not necessary. The purpose of this video is to enable you to understand what has been going on between the two of them, and what we have here is an example of when narcissists collide. I have, of course, spoken about this previously. There are 2 videos on my channel which talk about when narcissists collide, demonstrating the interactions between the different schools and spoken about in a more generic way. I've also examined the presidential debate from last year between Joe Biden and Donald Trump as demonstrating a further instance of when narcissists collide. Here we have two narcissists, and the dynamic and interaction between them provides a very useful opportunity for you to understand what happens when two narcissists interact with one another, and to answer many questions you have as to what has happened recently. To understand this, we need to go back in time, to go back to the genesis of this relationship, to autumn 2015. Morgan, who is apparently a Suits fan, the programme that Meghan Markle was once in, followed her on Twitter, and this precipitated her responding to him with a direct message on Twitter. She wrote, "Well, hello there. Thanks for the follow. Big fan of yours." At the time, Morgan will have been of greater prominence than Markle, appearing on television in various talent judging shows, a well-known broadcaster and columnist, and also seen as a somewhat rent-a-gob for controversial opinions. Morgan was more prominent than her. Accordingly, it suited Miss Markle to send a benign Hoover, which was her message of, "Well, hello there, thanks for the follow, big fan of yours," as she sought to assert control over Morgan by complimenting him. Piers Morgan referred to this message in a tweet of his own on the 4th of December 2018. He wrote at the time, "Our friendship started with this direct message and ended in a ruthless double ghosting. Why I'm not surprised the palace is already getting annoyed with Meghan Markle," and refers to his newspaper column at the time. When Meghan Markle sent that direct message, unconsciously she was seeking to assert control over Morgan in a benign way. He responds. She sends him pre-released Suits episodes, which they then discuss over their direct messages. And this creates a friendship between the two. It is quite common for two narcissists to cozy up in this way, because it is a mutually beneficial relationship. Narcissist 1 asserts control in a benign way over Narcissist 2. Narcissist 2 does not see that as an assertion of control, does not see any threat to control, but gratefully accepts the fuel and then responds in kind, seeking to assert control in a benign way over Narcissist 1. And thus, like a game of tennis, it goes back and forth. Narcissist 1 praises Narcissist 2, which shows that they are signaling control, that they are providing fuel. Narcissist 2 feels no threat. Therefore, Narcissist 2 responds in a benign way because Narcissist 1 remains painted white and thus compliments Narcissist 1 back. Narcissist 1 feels no threat to their control. They have received fuel. Therefore, they respond pleasantly to Narcissist 2. And on it goes, back and forth, until, of course, it goes wrong. But more of that later. You may well have witnessed this, where two people have basically a mutual appreciation club. And invariably, where it's over-the-top, effusive praise for one another that nobody really needs to know about, but you have two individuals who are kissing each other's backsides, particularly in public and on platforms, they're likely to be narcissists, where both are benefiting from this exchange. The world doesn't need to know about this friendship, it should be private, but both feel a need to parade it, and they are overly effusive in their praise because of the effect of the infatuation that they have for one another. It does not need to be romantic in nature, although that of course can happen, but here a friendship arises because they are giving what the other wants, control and fuel, although neither knows that. By the 29th of June 2016, Meghan is in London to see Serena Williams play tennis at Wimbledon. She hoovers Morgan by sending him a message, again in a benign fashion, and states, "Would love to say hi." This results in agreement for them to meet for pre-dinner drinks at his local pub. The online electronic interaction between the two has now been moved to a proximate relationship between the pair of them. And this meeting was reported by Morgan in his newspaper column in the Mail Online, where he wrote over a year later about it on the 27th of November 2017. And the headline was, "Hearty congratulations, Harry. You picked a real keeper, even if your romance did destroy my beautiful friendship with the amazing Meghan Markle." Note that even with the headline of Morgan congratulating Prince Harry, he manages to make it all about him by talking about the fact that Harry's romance with Meghan Markle destroyed his beautiful friendship with the amazing Meghan Markle. Interesting how she was no longer amazing, nor was it such a beautiful friendship, but we will come to that in due course. Morgan wrote, "Oh, thank the Lord, Prince Harry, long-time enfant terrible of the royal family, has finally made a sensible decision when it comes to his personal life. Yes, His Royal Naked Billiards Highness is at last settling down and getting married. I was delighted when I heard the big news today, not least because his bride-to-be, Meghan Markle, is a friend of mine. Or rather, she was until she met him, more of which later. When did you know she was the one?" journalists asked Harry. "The very first time we met," we replied, writes Morgan in his column. "I can believe it, because I first met Meghan Markle the very same week Harry wooed her, and she's a highly impressive lady. Our encounter involved a pub, several, for her, dirty vodka martinis, lots of laughter, and fascinating revelation. By the time we parted, I came away, not that I could have ever guessed it at the time, with a very clear idea of the woman who is now going to be a royal bride, and frankly, I can't think of a more perfect choice for a princess than Ms. Markle." Effusive praise indeed, and here we are, some 2 years following their initial interaction with one another, and the golden period continues. Remember, a golden period is not just about an intimate relationship between the two, but will occur in non-intimate instances. With Markle and Morgan, they are both non-intimate secondary sources in one another's fuel matrices, meaning that they are of moderate importance. However, they utilise this platform for prominence, grandiosity, and the assertion of control and gaining fuel. And in his own column, Morgan heaps the praise on her, speaks very highly about her, which all, of course, is an indirect hoover, because he's talking about her in that manner, expecting it will come to her attention. Morgan continues to write, where he talks about their first meeting back on the June 29, 2016. Markle had written, "I'm in London for a week of meetings and Wimbledon. Would love to say hi." She hoovers Morgan. He responds, "Fancy a drink in my local pub?" "Love to," she replied. Morgan continues to write, on the day Meghan sent me another message, "See you this evening. I may be there a little early because I have a dinner at 8. Looking forward to our pint." She added her 2 phone numbers but warned they're both acting up, champagne problems. Meghan was at Wimbledon tennis that day to watch our mutual friend Serena Williams, writes Morgan again. The character trait acquisition that occurs with regard to famous people by Morgan, and having to drop in again the fact that they're a mutual friend with somebody famous for the purpose of grandiosity in his newspaper column. Morgan continues to write that Meghan Markle stated, "Serena sends her love. You're very popular, as it turns out. Who knew?" And this newspaper column at that time provides us with insight writing about an event that was some roughly 18 months earlier, that things still all remained well between Morgan and Markle. He wrote further in his column, "She looked every inch the Hollywood superstar. Very slim, very leggy, very elegant, and impossibly glamorous." And he talks about their conversation, which spanned Rwanda, race and gun violence. And at the end of the night, he proclaimed, "I really, really liked her. When we drank in my pub, I found her to be a very smart, focused, thoughtful, feisty, and confident woman." Effusive praise indeed. Thereafter, Miss Markle went to a dinner party where she met Prince Harry. The love-in continues between Meghan Markle and Morgan. In November 2016, somebody called Spider Jones writes in reply to Morgan on Twitter, "Meghan's a beautiful soul. Too bad so many assholes out here cannot take the fact she's biracial." Piers Morgan writes, "Totally agree, Spider. Meghan's delightful." Again, she's painted white and continues to receive the praise. By the 15th of December 2016, Morgan writes a Daily Mail column on why Meghan would be a great bride. He praises her humanitarian spirit, which he then, of course, goes on to criticise, evidencing the hypocrisy of the narcissist, and he says that her being a divorcee and multiracial will be assets to the royal family. His column ends with him encouraging Prince Harry to pop the question as soon as possible. At this juncture, both Morgan and Markle regard one another as painted white, and the mutual appreciation continues. Morgan, of course, being more prominent with his column on the Daily Mail, is able to repeatedly assert control over both her and those that read his column by talking about her in a praiseworthy and admiring manner, which enables him to draw fuel from responses. On the 27th of November 2017, the royal family announced the engagement of Harry and Meghan. Morgan, of course, congratulates the couple, taking once again to his favoured platform of Twitter, and states, "Congrats, Meghan and Harry. My friend will make the perfect modern bride. P.S. Do I get an invite at Meghan Markle?" Well, once again, that demonstrates a Hoover, where there is an assertion of control by Morgan over Markle through the electronic method of Twitter. The Hoover is benign, where he issues congratulations and talks about her being my friend, which is part of pumping himself up and the grandiosity, and moreover talks about her making the perfect modern bride. Again, more praise. And then, of course, showing the sense of entitlement for which narcissists are known, a lack of boundary recognition, he asks whether he gets an invitation to the wedding. Following this tweet, on the same day, on the 27th of November 2017, there is continued praise of Miss Markle as a consequence of what has been written in the article, as I referred to earlier. And although he references the fact that the romance did destroy the beautiful friendship, that was done in terms of almost a slight pity play by Morgan to demonstrate, hey, we were really good friends, but since she's got with you, I don't tend to hear from her as much. And Morgan has continued throughout this period of time to speak in admiring terms about Miss Markle, to praise her. But the fact, of course, that Miss Markle may be communicating less with him will start to have an impact upon Morgan. And then things start to turn sour. Miss Markle, of course, interacted with Piers Morgan for the purposes of the prime aims, although she did not know this. To assert control over him, to gain fuel, to gain character traits and residual benefits. Because, of course, at the outset of their relationship, he was far more prominent than her. And, instinctively, her narcissism will have gravitated her towards him for the purposes of asserting control over him, to harness him as a non-intimate secondary source because he was useful. Not because she actually wanted to be friends with him, although, of course, that is what she believed. The friendship originated because her narcissism identified that she could 1. Control him, 2. Draw fuel from him, 3. Obtain character traits, and 4thly, the important residual benefits of Morgan being a prominent broadcaster that would speak in favourable terms about her. It was well worth cultivating the friendship. Of course, she then lands a much bigger prize. Prince Harry. Far more famous, wealthier, more prominent, and therefore, in typical fashion of a narcissist, focuses on that individual dropping other individuals, commonly called ghosting. This, of course, is done because Meghan Markle has no emotional empathy for Piers Morgan. She doesn't care how her disappearance from interacting with him or the reduction of interaction affects him. She doesn't need to control him by continuing to interact with him. She can control him by having nothing to do with him, the third assertion of control. She doesn't need his fuel. She's getting fuel from lots of other places now, as her stock rises as a consequence of the engagement. Fawning fans, the welcoming arms of the royal family, Prince Harry himself. It's a fuel fest. Morgan's fuel isn't needed. Furthermore, his character traits are not necessary. There are plenty of other people to obtain them for, and his residual benefits have essentially faded away or have been eclipsed by the much greater ones afforded by her engagement to Prince Harry. And as a consequence of that, he's dropped. That, of course, wounds Morgan. That signals to him that he's no longer important, that he is no longer powerful. At an unconscious level, it makes him feel vulnerable and weakened. And his own narcissism, of course, activates to defend him. And it does so, not by causing him to go on a direct attack towards Meghan Markle by ringing her up and saying, "Hey, why aren't you talking to me anymore?" Instead, he starts to smear her, which is the indirect assertion of control. And as a consequence of that, for instance, there was an article that appears in Morgan's column in the Mail Online on the 12th of February 2019, where he writes, "Sorry, George, but Meghan's no Princess Diana, and it's not the media that's vilifying her, it's her own family who she abandoned for celebrities like you." And there then follows criticism of Meghan Markle by Piers Morgan in his article. He continues with this in his tweets. For example, on the 17th of December 2018, Morgan tweeted, "I'd happily speak to Meghan too, like I used to regularly, but she ghosted me after meeting someone more important." And that was his response to somebody called Kevin Evans, writing, "I've spoken at length on numerous occasions to one of the two people involved," quoting Morgan. And the individual writes, "If only all decisions could be made on only hearing one side of the debate." And Morgan says that he'd happily speak to Meghan too, like I used to regularly, but she ghosted me after meeting someone more important. He uses Twitter to smear her to this particular follower, allowing in his unconscious mind him to assert control over her through the second assertion of control. And there is an element of pity play there by saying she used to deal with me but no longer does so. Criticism of her ghosting him. And this goes on through late 2017 and 2018 and results in, for instance, Piers Morgan appearing on The Late Late Show. And he states, "I just think Meghan's a social climber," which, again, is smearing her on a platform. What happened to the individual that he described as a keeper to Prince Harry, one that he lavished praise on? Well, what we're seeing here is the shift from white to black. So to begin with, when Meghan Markle was giving Piers Morgan control, everything was rosy in the garden of Piers and Meghan, which meant that his responses to her, his hoovering of her, was benign. He would praise her. He would do so indirectly, through indirect hoovers in his newspaper columns, in his tweets, stating about how wonderful she was, praising her, admiring her, complimenting her. But then, as a consequence of her dropping him, which of course is part of her behaviour as a narcissist towards him, she no longer has any use for him, has no sense of accountability towards him out of their friendship, no sense of emotional empathy for him, acting out of a sense of entitlement, she drops him. Now, of course, you might say, well, she's a very busy woman. Indeed, but it only takes a moment to send a text or a direct message, just like she used to somebody who is apparently a friend. And her own behaviour in no longer having anything to do with Piers Morgan clearly demonstrates that she was asserting control over him by popping him back on the shelf and having nothing to do with him. She didn't need to take him off the shelf. When he popped into her mind, she didn't act on it to hoover him, because basically her narcissism said, you don't need to. You can control him by keeping him on the shelf. You don't need fuel from him. You don't need character traits from him. You don't need residual benefits from him. Therefore, he serves no purpose to you. Keep him where he is. You can control him that way, and you don't need anything more from him. And that is what will often happen to you when you are in the shelf dynamic with a narcissist. You'll be kept on the shelf out of the way because the narcissist doesn't need to use you in any way, and you'll be taken off the shelf when you prove to be of use again. Now, you might also think, well, hasn't Piers Morgan got some degree of justification to be cheesed off with her? They seem to be pretty good friends, meeting up for drinks, praising one another, and then she drops him like a hot potato. He's bound to feel pissed off. Indeed, anybody might do. But remember, he's a narcissist. So her failure to interact with him thereafter wounds him. That threatens his sense of control, so his own narcissism caused him to respond in a way whereby he asserts control indirectly by smearing her through Twitter posts, newspaper columns, and appearances on talk shows. And that enables Morgan to have a platform whereby his narcissism, in his unconscious, feels that he's asserting control over her. Now, you might be asking, okay, so I understand that, HG, in terms of that's his response to the fact that he dropped her. But why did he keep on going? Why did it seem as if he had an obsession? Well, very simply this. Meghan Markle becomes famous. She's marrying a prince of the realm. She's everywhere. She's the subject of news broadcasts. She's appearing in newspapers. She's talked about. She appears on social media. Therefore, she repeatedly comes on Piers Morgan's radar. He can't avoid her. He picks up a newspaper. There she is. He turns on a television set. There she is. And in a sense, it's a form of torture for Piers Morgan, because the person that has made him feel weak and vulnerable, although he doesn't realise this, keeps cropping up. And therefore, when she comes on the radar, his narcissism says this. And remember, this is occurring in his unconscious. Piers, here's Meghan on your radar again. First question, do you have control of her? The answer is, of course, no, you do not. Well, applying the first law of narcissism, all appliances must be brought under and kept under control at all times. So what we must now do is ensure that we assert control over her, in some form. Can we ring her up? For whatever reason, that was off the table, and therefore there was no opportunity to undertake a direct assertion of control. Quite probably also, even if Piers Morgan had a means of meeting up with her or a telephone number, his narcissism recognised that there was a risk that he'd be ignored, which would cause even greater wounding. And therefore, remember, because his narcissism is a self-defence mechanism, its role is to prevent him from being wounded further. So that when Meghan Markle comes up on the radar, his narcissism first asks, as it does with anybody, is this person under control? The answer is no, because there has been no information recently to signal that she is under control. So she remains painted black. The narcissism then says, okay, because she's on our radar, we need to assert control over her. We're not going to make Piers approach her directly, because either he has no means of doing that, he has no telephone number for her, can't get near her, or, even if he were able to do that, we perceive that she's going to ignore him, which will wound Piers, so we, the narcissism as a self-defense mechanism, isn't going to make him hoover her. Instead, let's assert control, because we have to, by smearing her. And as a prominent broadcaster, Piers Morgan is eminently placed to keep doing this. So every time Meghan Markle was coming up on his radar, she would then cause him to smear her because her existence threatened his sense of control over her. Every time he switched the television on, every time he picked up a newspaper, every time he went on social media, boom, there she was, because she was so prominent. And therefore that threatened his control. His narcissism responded by saying, we can't hoover her, so we can't do the direct assertion of control, we must do it indirectly, and therefore we'll smear her. And so that's what he kept doing, repeatedly in the tweets, on the talk show interviews, and through the columns. And in one interview, Morgan said, she owes me an invitation to the wedding to make up for cutting me dead. Again, smearing, sense of entitlement, no emotional empathy. Now, that's Piers Morgan's reaction to the ongoing situation of threats to his control. But what about Meghan Markle? How is she responding to these various smearings? Well, to begin with, she may not be aware of some of them, because after all, as we understand, she doesn't read the press, right? But she's not going to be looking at every single thing that Piers Morgan tweets. Indeed, she probably has come off social media by this point, in terms of at least her own personal ones rather than official channels. Moreover, she hasn't got the time to be looking at all of this, but it's doubtless that some of this smearing will have reached her ears. Friends may have mentioned it, she might just happen upon it herself when she's watching television or looking at a newspaper. So it's likely that the smearing will have come to her attention. Now, this will have threatened her control, because she's being criticised by Morgan, and her unconscious narcissism will say this: Piers Morgan has come on the radar. Is Piers under our control? No, he's not. Right, we now need to get him under control. He's not under control because we can see that he's smearing, threatening the control. We're not going to do it directly because he's hostile to us. And instead, we're not going to smear him. What we will do is we will cause Meghan to do nothing and act like he doesn't exist. And therefore, her narcissism selected the third assertion of control by doing nothing. I suspect also it will on occasions have asserted control through the indirect method of smearing, not publicly, because of course she wasn't operating newspaper columns and it wouldn't be appropriate for her to comment through official channels about this particular individual. But it's doubtless that she will have remarked to Prince Harry, for example, oh, I see Piers Morgan, he's obsessed with me, the loudmouth won't shut up. And Prince Harry says, well, that's Morgan for you, he's a rent-a-gob, just ignore him. So when Meghan Markle becomes aware of what Piers Morgan is doing, that threatens her control. Her narcissism didn't select a direct assertion of control over Piers by hoovering him, and instead will have either cause private smearing, where she remarks to friends, to Prince Harry, other individuals about Piers Morgan's behaviour, no doubt describing it as upsetting, and he's just put out because I haven't got time to stay in touch with him any longer, and no doubt explaining that her ghosting of him was for genuine, decent reasons, and that she doesn't merit this character assassination, pity play. And of course, those that are listening will agree with her and say, oh, Morgan's renowned for this. He falls out with people all of the time. He's always mouthing off. He's a big mouth. He's arrogant. Ignore him. And Prince Harry, the friends, other people who tell her this, who agree with her that Morgan's an odious individual, enables her narcissism to feel that control has been asserted. And in other instances, she won't have known about it, and in other instances, she will have just ignored it by the third assertion of control. So that brings us to the dynamic just before the wedding. I will pick up the continuance of this dynamic in part 2. Just before the wedding, I will continue with how this dynamic plays out between the two and further events in part 25. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.